Yvonne, thank you for joining us in the program.
My pleasure.
Yvonne, so were you really spying for the Americans in Afghanistan?
No, in fact I said to my captors, if I am America's secret weapon, then God help the Americans.
So what actually were their accusations against you?
I had entered their country illegally, without a passport, without a visa, and while everyone else in Afghanistan was trying to get out and into safety in Pakistan, they couldn't understand why somebody like me would sneak into their country. And they were very suspicious. It was a time of war, and they didn't believe that I was a journalist, which I can fully understand. But over a period of days, we were able to prove that I was indeed a bona fide journalist.
And what were the grounds they left you? They released you. What were the grounds they released you on?
They released me after 10, 11 days on humanitarian grounds. Mullah Muhammad Omar, the spiritual leader of the Taliban, signed a document which was then faxed to Kabul, where I was later held in the final few days. And it said that Mullah Omar was releasing me on humanitarian grounds.
Even when you came back to England, you know, the first controversy, you first created the headlines, as I said in the outset, when you were actually seized by the Taliban, but you created second, set of headlines when you came back, and you appreciated them.
Well, I've always believed in speaking the truth, which isn't a very popular thing to do at times, but they had treated me with respect and courtesy for the full time during my captivity. That isn't to say I wasn't terrified. I was terrified every day, but their treatment of me was quite exceptional, and it deserved to be reported, you know, that I had been treated very well by my captors. But
you have also been very critical of their treatment toward the women in general.
Well, you know, that part of the region, women do have a very difficult time, and I think looking back now, it's more down to culture than down to Islam.
Looking down now, you said it was not realized then.
No, my knowledge of Islam was very limited.
But yet your first husband was a Muslim.
Dawood Zarur, the father of my daughter, yes, he was a Sunni Muslim, and he sometimes tried to talk about Islam, and I'd say, I'm not interested, and when I began looking into Islam some years later, I was amazed by what I was reading, and I picked up the phone and spoke to Dawood and said, why didn't you tell me about this great faith? And although we have split up, we're still very good friends. And he laughed and he said, Yvonne, you wouldn't listen to me, you wouldn't take any notice. So there it was, right under my very nose.
It's still surprising because, you know, in one of your interviews with Islam Online with Muhammad Ayub Khan some time ago, he asked you the question, did you have any knowledge about Islam before your encounter with Taliban? And you said nothing more factual than would fill the back of a postage stamp. And yet you were married to a Muslim who was head of a certain PLO operations and was the father of your child. Does it make sense?
I just switched off at any mention of religion. At that point, I had pretty much made up my mind about Islam. I felt as though I knew enough about Islam that I didn't want to know any more. And I regarded Islam as a faith which subjugated and oppressed women. Now I look back and I try and find out, when did the poison start? When did it begin? And I was brought up in the north of England in a little village where you were either a Protestant or a Catholic. There was nothing as exotic as Islam. And I tried to look back and see when this demonization process began, and it began at the time of the Iranian Revolution, when the Iranians seized a lot of American hostages, and the yellow ribbons were all over, tied onto trees and everywhere in America until the hostages were released. And at that time, Hollywood got involved and produced the film Not Without My Daughter. and it was the traumatic child custody battle between Betty Mahmoudi and her Iranian husband. And that film demonized...
Were you married to Daud at that time?
No, but I had seen the film, and that I'd seen it on the big screen, and I'd seen it with my eyes, and then I read the book. And as far as I was concerned, Islam defeminized women, subjugated them, oppressed them. And in fact, really, what I was reading was a child custody battle between two people which happened to cross over into two countries. Two countries which were...
But isn't it surprising, Yvonne, that yet you decided, you had seen this film, you had all the demonizing influences of Muslim men on your mind, and yet you decided to marry a Muslim man and have your child from him?
He was quite amazing. He was exceptional. And in fact, he was an excellent father, very supportive, and so I didn't see him as a Muslim man. I just saw him as somebody who was quite an amazing person, who was a brilliant father, a brilliant person in my life at that time. And unfortunately, like so many things, you know, a few years down the line we drifted apart, and he went his way and I went mine, although we still maintain a great friendship.
For how long you stayed together?
We were together probably for 4 or 5 years.
But that didn't bring you to Islam?
No.
What brought you to Islam then?
Well, after the Taliban experience, I had given an undertaking. You know, I said, if you release me, I promise I will study Islam and I will read the Quran.
But once you were free, you were free not to...
In truth, I would have promised to have learned Cantonese, Swahili. I would have promised to do anything just to get out of that situation. And
exactly.
Yes.
So what made you read Quran then? I mean, you could have, actually, that was a prison commitment. You could have...
You know, I've given my word. It's as old-fashioned and as simple as that. I had made a promise, I'd given an undertaking, and so I started to read the Quran, and I was given a Quran with an index in the back, and so I thought, I'll make this easy. I'll cherry pick all the subjects relating to women, and so I'm looking for the chapter on how to beat your wife, how to subjugate
How to beat your wife?
Yes.
In Quran?
Well, you know, this is my twisted idea of what, you know, this religion is evil and violent and oppresses women. And I couldn't believe what I was reading, because the Quran makes it, as you know, crystal clear that women are equal in spirituality, worth and education. And education is so important that whether a woman is married or single, it is her duty to go out and seek education, and if she can't get it in the home, then she has to go out and seek to be educated. And I was amazed by this. I then started looking at the divorce rights, the property rights, the inheritance rights, and
At some stage you said that the Hollywood, reading Quran and the divorce laws reminded you of the Hollywood divorce lawyers.
Well, all these divorce lawyers that get huge big settlements for their clients or spend weeks drawing up prenuptial agreements, it was already available for Muslim women 1400 years ago. I mean, the prenuptial agreement that the Hollywood stars get now, it's the same as the contract that a woman will draw up for her wedding, and even then she has the right to retain her own identity. She doesn't have to take the name of her husband if she doesn't want to. And so there were lots of sort of wow factors that I was reading. I mean, when you think about it, less than 50 years ago in America, a black woman could not sit next to a white man on a bus in the days of segregation, and that is less than 50 years ago. And yet 1400 years ago, the Quran made it clear that Islam transcends nationality, skin colour, cultures, and in fact the Prophet, peace be upon him, his last sermon, he makes it perfectly clear that we are all equal, and if we are to be judged differently in different levels, it's on our level of piety and observance as Muslims.
If this is how you look at Quran treating men and women equally, how would you make sense of the Muslim feminist and proponents like in Pakistan and India, like women like Asma Jahangir, for instance, in Pakistan, strong opponents and strong critics of the religious establishment or of Islam occasionally, in Morocco, in India, in Pakistan, in Turkey? How would you make sense of that?
Well, I am a feminist. I am a great supporter of women's rights. And I believe that what women in the 70s in Britain and America and across Europe were striving for, this equality, was already available to Muslim women 1400 years ago. And there will be people who sit and listen to me saying, oh, she's a feminist, she's a modernizer. The beauty of Islam is that it has not changed. The Quran has not changed. 1400 years has not changed. And that is its strength. It doesn't need to change. It's as relevant today as it was 1400 years ago. And what I would say to Muslims across the world is...
What makes you so sure about that? That it hasn't changed?
Because this is something that I have specifically looked into. I studied Islam for 30 months before I reverted. And one of the things that interested me were the origins and how the Quran came into being and how it was delivered over a 23-year period and finally compiled. In fact, when it was compiled into a book form, the first keeper of the Quran was a woman. It was entrusted to a sister, this precious gift. And I've looked into the historical background, because after I read the Quran, I then went back to the Bible. And then I discovered that the New Testament wasn't written until 70 years after the emergence of Jesus. Now then, we know as journalists that we can't get our facts right 24 hours after an event. So how could something be so accurate 70 years down the line? And I realized this is why the synoptic gospels in the Bible contradict each other. And although the Bible is a beautiful book, it's a compendium of wonderful stories, it's not accurate, it's not factual. But the Quran, you could look at a Quran off a printing press today and compare it to the first available Quran, and you will see that there is no difference. And this is the strength.
Quran Kareem was also not written down during the days of the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, right? It was compiled in the first Caliph's time period.
It was compiled over
most people remembered it. They remembered it by heart, as Prophet said. They remembered it. So it was basically what they call in Urdu is Sina dar Sina. Basically, they knew it.
It was compiled over a 23-year period, but it's like the Hadith. The Hadith have been compiled in an extremely scientific way. That there is corroboration, matching statements, independence of corroboration, and the accuracy at which these scholars strived to attain from the Hadith is absolutely amazing. And as I say, what I would say to feminists is, yes, we have a right. It is our right to be treated equally. But don't modernize. Islam does not need to modernize. And I would say...
What do you mean by that?
Well, there are people who interpret it, some things in some ways, and say it needs to be updated, it needs to be modernized. Irshad Manji, the Canadian author of The Trouble with Islam, She's a lesbian, and she's saying that some of the Sharia needs to be changed to try and keep up with the new century. And I say no. The Quran is a perfect code of life, a perfect code of living, and it doesn't need to change. It doesn't need to be updated. And I would say to Muslims, beware of the modernizers within, because they will try and dilute our great faith. And what you'll end up with is a hybrid like you have in Christianity. Look at the mess that the Christians are in. The Christian church is fractured, it's divided. They have gay clerics, gay bishops. So one part of the church is split from the other. Other sections of the church are trying to introduce female bishops, female church leaders, and they're trying to introduce and reinvent things that simply were not there. And they're doing this to try and popularize the faith, to try and bring people in. And it isn't going to work.
Yvonne, Irshad Manji is not exactly an intellectual, right? Those who have read her books, there are serious gaps in her scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, she isn't a scholar.
She's not a scholar.
She's a lesbian with a chip on her shoulder who wants to take a dig at Islam.
So she's not a scholar, but people who have her lifestyle, where should Islam place them? I mean, she is like that. Now we come to believe people are born like that. So what should we do with them?
Well, I am not here to be that judgmental. When the day of judgment comes, I won't be answering for Irshad Manji or people like her. I will be answering for me and accounting for me. And this is the other thing with Islam, that it gives you a responsibility to account for your own behaviour and your own actions. And it doesn't matter how good or bad your family is, or the people around you, or your friends. You can be surrounded by the most pious people, but it is not going to give you a ticket to paradise. It is, it is your behaviour, your attitude in this life, which will dictate what happens to you in the next life.
Just a few moments before you said you went back. When you read Quran, you went back and read Bible once again. Were you ever a practicing Christian?
Yes, I was. And I was brought up in Sunday school, the Christian version of the madrasa. I was a Sunday school teacher. I sang in the choir. I was quite an active part of the church community. When I moved to London, I joined a very famous church, St. James's in Piccadilly. I probably went to church twice a month, which in some people's eyes in secular Britain is bordering on fanaticism. And so I was quite active. I've always believed in the one God, and my belief in God was reinforced when I was reading the Quran. I happen to think Christianity is a great springboard to Islam, and that's probably why it took me maybe 30 months of reading, going back
what exactly
and forward.
do you mean when you say Christianity being a great springboard to Islam? This is a very secular way of looking at religion, isn't it?
No, you've got the same prophets, the same characters appearing in the Bible as are written about in the Quran. So you've essentially got, it's like a plant. You've essentially got the same soil, the same roots. It's just how you develop the plant. And as I say, I think that all the groundwork was there for me. The only thing the major thing that I had to get over was the business of the Holy Trinity, belief in the Father, the Son and the Holy Ghost, to move from that to the belief in the one God. But when I look back, I realised that I always believed in the one God anyway.
But you'd agree that Britain is a very secular society as compared to the United States, for instance, and only 7.5% people are regular churchgoers, right? You identified yourself with that 7-8% people who actually are devoted to Christianity in this country.
Well, I wouldn't say that I was devoted. In fact, I would go as far as to say I believe in Britain today there are far more Muslim, active Muslim worshippers than there are Christians in this country. And by that I mean people who turn up to church once a week compared to people who go to the mosque on a Friday. And I would be quite confident in saying that if it's not the same, it's probably more practicing Muslims in this country than there are practicing Christians.
Will it be correct to say that in the summer of 2003, when you converted to Islam, you were coming from a godless society into the world of God? You were moving from non-religion into religion, rather than moving from Christianity into Islam?
No, I was moving from one religion to another, but I actually left the Church of England first before I became a Muslim, and that was over the siege of the Nativity, when Israeli soldiers were firing on what essentially was the birthplace of Christ. And as far as Christians were concerned, this is one of the holiest places in Christendom. And the Israeli soldiers had no respect for it, and there was a statue of the Virgin Mary above the church, and they riddled that statue with bullets. Nothing behind it, you know. It was just
serious.
It was just target practice, and it was.
And nothing happened.
And nothing happened. The Pope broke silence first and said, "This is despicable." The Church of England, which is the church that I belong to, said and did nothing. And I was so furious, and I thought, if my church leaders cannot even stand up and defend the birthplace of Christianity, then why on earth would they even stand to defend me? You know, I am nothing. And I just thought, I don't need to be in this gutless, spineless organisation. And I left. And I walked away from the Church of England. I wrote about it. It upset the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the, cleric-wise, the head of the church.
This is 2001?
This was 2002 or 3. 2003, I think.
It's 2003.
And I just thought, you know, I don't need to go to a church and pray through some priest to speak to God. You know, at least with Islam I can have dialect straight away. And what I loved also about Islam is that I can draw a line in the sand, and that is my mosque. That is my place of prayer. I don't need a great big fancy building or some priest with fine garments and ceremonial robes to tell me how to pray. And it's that simplicity about it.
When you came back and appreciated Taliban, that it treated you decently, and then subsequently when you converted to Islam, many people were extremely unhappy. Some people brought the concept of the Stockholm Syndrome. They said you had fallen in love, or there was a bonding relationship between you and your captors. Well,
they were all very handsome young men, but I was terrified of them the whole time. And I certainly didn't bond with them. I spat at them, I swore at them, I refused to cooperate with them, I shouted at them, I threw things at them. I refused to eat their food, which really hurt them. And
why you refused eating the food?
Because I wanted to use the telephone, and they said that this wasn't possible, and so I said, I'm not eating another thing until I get the telephone. And a war of attrition started, and for 10 days I went without food.
But what about the Stockholm Syndrome itself?
Well, to have Stockholm Syndrome, you have to bond with your captors. And there was no bonding. There was a lot of abuse. And in fact, when Mullah Omar released me on humanitarian grounds, I don't know who was happier to see me cross back into Pakistan, the Taliban or me.
You crossed from Kabul into Peshawar?
Yes, I was driven down to Stockholm and handed over to the Pakistan authorities, who at least had the good grace and decency to accommodate me because the representatives of the British government didn't turn up.
Why did they not?
They came up with a variety of different excuses, but I discovered that if you're in trouble, one of the worst things to have in your possession is a British passport. Because
are you serious?
Yes, I'm serious.
People struggle all their lives to get a British passport.
Well, the British government did little or nothing for me.
So do you think they betrayed you?
I wouldn't have said that they
disowned you.
Betrayed me. I think that they exploited me. I was used as a stick with which to beat the Taliban. The British government was very happy to say, look at this poor English woman, trapped, held by these brutal, evil people. We're probably not going to see her alive again. In fact, the British government would have been delighted had I been sent home in a box, because they could have said, look,
This is what their culture was.
But when I
came... Do you think that you were set to release by the Taliban was a great disappointment to the British establishment?
Well, it was when I came out and said, they were a nice bunch of guys and they treated me with courtesy.
So they came up with the
respect.
accusation of Stockholm Syndrome. They said you fall in love with your captors.
Yes, because you can't drop bombs on nice people. And the last thing they wanted was me to come out unscathed and say, hey, these guys were okay, actually. It was not what they wanted to hear. The drums of war were beating. In fact, they'd started the war. I was in Kabul when I felt the full terror of being bombed by my own country. They did not want me to come back and say nice things about my captors. What they wanted me to say were things that I would have said had I been in Abu Ghraib, had I been in Guantanamo Bay, had I been in Bagram, had I been a ghost detainee, had I been shaved, shackled, abused and thrown into an orange suit. In fact, every single thing that happened to people in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay, I thought would have happened to me, which is why I often address political meetings and say, thank Allah, I was captured by the most evil, brutal regime in the world and not by the Americans.
Will it be right to say that you walked out of captivity with the determination to more about this religion, to know more about this religion and these people? You thought that Islam was somehow the responsible for their good character?
Well, apart from giving my word, I also thought, as a journalist, it's shocking that I am covering the Middle East and Asia and I know nothing about Islam. And how on earth can I write authoritatively about these people when I know nothing about their faith, which is obviously a way of life?
At one stage, somebody asked you a question, that what is the thing that most impressed you about Islam? And you said it is the sisters. You didn't talk of brotherhood. You didn't talk of universal values. You talked of the sisters.
The sisterhood in Islam makes Western feminism pale into insignificance. I have met sisters from all over Asia, the Middle East, Australia, New Zealand, North America, right across Europe, South Africa, so many places. And whether they have been formally educated or not, what I have met are women who are inspirational, very strong, very resilient, and they are usually the first educators. And I began to realize the reason why Islam is as strong today as it was 1400 years ago isn't because of the jihadis, isn't because of invading Muslim armies spreading the word of Islam. It's been the women, because they have handed Islam down to their children, and their children have carried this very precious baton and handed it down to their children. And these, the women are the protectors of Islam. And in fact, as I said before, the very first Quran in book form was given into the protection of a sister.
But many people who convert to Islam talk of its universal values, its connectivity across the globe, its brotherhood. You do not necessarily talk of all those things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the backbone of the Ummah is female. These are the women who have the hardships. They are the ones who are bearing the children. They are the ones who are seeing their husbands, fathers, children going off to war, maybe not coming back. They are in the front line of all the miseries that are being thrown at the Muslim world today, and they are as strong and organised as ever. And I look round at some of the Muslim men and I despair. Where are the real men? Where are the Khalid bin Walids? Where are the greatest role model is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And even in death, he has managed to unite us all over these Danish cartoons. It is through him that we have forgotten the sects, the splits, the divisions, and come together in one protest about these horrible cartoons that were coming out of Denmark. And there is a great role model for the brothers to aspire and follow, and yet, where are they? I really do despair.
Do you think we overreacted on the cartoons? No,
not at all. I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about the Prophet Muhammad 5 years ago. I'd never even heard of him, just nothing. Now I would give my last drop of blood to protect his integrity, his memory, his honour. So no, I don't think we did overreact. What we did send out to the world is don't mess with us, don't do it again. And I think that has become quite clear now.
But just before the interview, you said you were very disappointed by the lack of brotherhood in the Islamic world. Mm-hmm. What exactly do you mean by that?
You look at the war on terror today. The Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay is full of brothers that have been literally sold like pieces of meat by their so-called brothers in Pakistan, and in they've been sold for money. You look at the rendition flights that brothers have been put on to be taken to countries to be tortured. Which countries have they been taken to be tortured? Syria, Jordan, Egypt. Who is doing the torturing? Brothers are torturing brothers. What are they thinking of? They have no honour, no respect. They're going to burn in hell for what they're doing. They have no fear of Allah. They can't possibly have any fear when they carry out this dirty work against their brothers. It's very, very sad. You look at the Arab leaders who have belly danced in front of America, handing Iraq over on a plate to the Americans. These Arab leaders, what sort of Muslims are they? You look round and it is very, very, very sad.
So what do you think of the Muslim leadership in Britain then?
Well, a classic example, recently Condoleezza Rice visited Jack Straw's hometown of Blackburn, and the committee in the Hidayah Mosque opened up their doors and were going to welcome Condoleezza Rice into their mosque. Now, there were two things that upset me about that decision. One is she is a blood-soaked war criminal, drenched in the blood of our brothers and sisters across the world. So why would you want her to defile a mosque? And the second, that mosque does not allow sisters in to worship, and yet they were quite prepared to let a non-Muslim woman...
Are you suggesting the Muslim women are not allowed in the mosque?
Yes.
Yet Condoleezza Rice was welcomed.
It was absolutely outrageous. And if there wasn't so many other things to do, more pressing things to do, one of the things that I would like to do as a Muslim living in Britain is to tackle every single mosque that closes its doors to women. How dare they do that? We should have a choice to either, if we want to pray at home, then we can pray at home with our children, with our family around, it's convenient. But if we want to pray in the mosque, we should be able to pray in the mosque. And how dare these brothers stop sisters from praying in the mosque? And they hide behind feeble excuses, well, there are no wudu facilities. You know, I don't buy that. Get them installed, open up the mosques to the sisters as well. Who builds the mosques? Whose money goes into building the mosques? The sisters provide just as much, if not more, to build these mosques.
You refer to the sisters again and again. A short while ago you also said that you're so disappointed by the modern Muslim men. There's no Khalid bin Walid among. What do you expect the men to do?
Well, you know, the only way you can fight the enemy is by standing up, and unfortunately most Muslim men are on their knees at the moment, and you cannot take on the enemy in any sort of level, in a fighting level, in a battle of words or wills. You cannot do it when you're on your knees. And the Muslim men, you know, they must wear sponges on their legs because they seem to be down on their knees.
Always down.
And,
but only a short while ago you also said Islam is so strong today, like 1400 years ago. What is that you meant then, if Muslim men are always on the knees?
Well, you know, those men who are on their knees, while they're down there, they should be reading the Quran and learning that they fear no one but Allah. They submit to no one but Allah. And, you know, the authorities, the boss class, the likes of the Bush administration, people like Blair, they are never ever going to like us as Muslims. They are never going to like us. Well, we should be able to deal with that, but what we should try and make them do is...
What is this boss class you refer?
Well, I suppose it very much comes from my background. I'm working class. And, you know, Britain is a very class system. You've got the elite up there and you've got the working class down there. And although it's changed and the lines are more blurred, the elite are still up there and they look down. They look down on the middle class, the working class. They look down on all levels of society. And I think, well, okay, I don't care if you don't like me, but please respect me. And that is the most that Muslims in Britain can hope for from the establishment, to just have a level of recognition, a level of respect. And we are never, ever going to get the respect of the establishment by being on our knees.
Who do you define as establishment in this country?
The establishment, we're talking about the Prime Minister, the government ministers. We're talking banks, the upper echelons of royalty, unseen establishment
figures. The judges, the law firms.
Yes.
But aren't you referring to a very small, tiny class in a country of 65 million people?
Yeah, they're the ones who are ruling Britain today.
1%.
There's 1 or 2% own something like 70% of Britain. You know,
you think accent in this country still matters? To have the right accent, to have the royal pronunciation, the received pronunciation, does it really matter? To make progress in this country?
I think it does, you know, in perceptions. I mean, your English accent is far more crystal clear than mine. And
you must be kidding.
No, but it's something that the Taliban picked up on when they started questioning me, and they said, you have a very strange voice.
Strange voice?
Yes, and your accent. And I said, we don't all talk like the Queen. And then I said, the little light bulb went off in my head, and I said, I come from the tribal areas of Britain. And
tribal areas?
That's what they said. And I said, yes, I come from the area between Scotland...
You created that?
Yes. I said I come from the area between Scotland and England, and we're called Geordies, which is true. We are called Geordies, people from the northeast of England. And then I said we're horribly oppressed by the people in the south, and they like that.
Let's move forward a little bit. How has your family reacted? I was reading that initially your family was very upset by your conversion, but then your parents, your mother, really accepted that.
My mother was just delighted that I stopped partying, clubbing, drinking, burning the candle at both ends. And now she's more accepting to Islam. So that was a major victory for me. And the other advantage was, as a reaction to my conversion, she started going to church again. And
as a reaction to your conversion?
As a reaction, yes. And I said, this is great.
So you brought religion back into her life?
Yes. I said, at least you're getting some spirituality into your life. And then I've said, you just have to make that little jump from Christianity to Islam. And she's 79, and she said, I don't have time for these newfangled Arab religions.
Arab religion?
And I said, where do you think Jesus is from? Manchester? And for the first time in her life, she began to realize that the roots of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all wrapped round.
From a small triangular area in the Middle East. Well, what about the most important relationship in your life, your daughter Daisy?
Daisy is my greatest supporter. I would love to see her convert to Islam. I hope, that it will happen one day. She does.
So is Daisy a Christian?
She's a Christian, and it's a bizarre situation because both her parents are Muslim. When Daisy was born, I decided that she should make her own decision when she gets older what her faith is going to be, and that was working quite nicely. She had the influence of her father's faith, she had the influence of my faith, and so she was spiritually aware. And then my mother said something one time about, you ought to get Daisy christened into become a Christian. And I said, let her decide when she's older. And my mother said, but she's nothing at the moment. And Dawood, her father, said, well, actually she is. She's a Muslim, and until she changes her faith, she was born a Muslim. And my mother was horrified at this and set about, I think, putting ideas in Daisy's head. And when she was 7 or 8, she said to me, Mummy, I want to be a Christian. So she was christened in July 2001.
At a time when almost you were about to become a Muslim.
Yes, and it's everything is for a reason. Only Allah knows best. And she became a Christian. She's very spiritually aware. She's at boarding school. I'm quite relaxed that she's in the Christian faith, because it's very, very similar. And as I said before,
it's a graduating point towards Islam.
Yes. I think it's you've got to learn your 2 + 2s before you can go on to a more senior level of math. And so I'm quite relaxed about her developing spiritually as a Christian. But she's also, as I say, acutely aware of Islam and its importance. And when we are on holidays, we always go to a Muslim country.
Even what about the rest of the society? How have they reacted? People around you, around your family, your friends?
There are those who are completely prejudiced, and I've got girlfriends who meet me and say, you're looking really well, you've lost so much weight, your complexion is healthier, you seem happier, what is the secret? And I'll say, it's Islam. And they say, no, really, nobody's around, just tell me.
What gym have you joined?
And, well, it's either something like that, or is there a man in your life? And I'm saying, how shallow are you that you would think that I would change my faith for a man? What does that say about yourself? And they say, well, just tell us what it is. And I say it's Islam, and they are, in a denial over it.
But when I look at some of your old photographs with this woman here with this short bob hairstyle, and from this hairstyle and this face and this profile you change into this, how do people react to that? This dress code?
Well, the hijab is part of my business suit. It tells the world I am a Muslim, I'm a Muslim woman, treat me with respect, don't hit on me, don't offer me alcohol, don't get intimate or put your hand on my shoulder. Or
so you don't shake hands?
No.
Okay.
No.
So I broke the rule.
Well, do you know, it's difficult. Sometimes I will just go like that and people accept it. But at the beginning of this year, I was in Cairo and I met Sheikh Tantawi, and we had a meeting, and when we left to go, he went to shake my hand.
Sheikh?
Yes, from Al-Azhar, the Sheikh. And I just said, no, sorry, I don't shake hands. And
do you think it's part of Islam?
Yes, it is.
That women should not shake hands with them?
Absolutely. You know, it's something that the Prophet, peace be upon him, would never dream of doing, and he is our greatest role model. And so I just pulled back and said, no, I don't shake hands. And he insisted on shaking my hand, and you could tell his entourage were very unhappy by this gesture.
His gesture or your gesture?
His gesture. And again, I went like that. And then he said in Arabic to my host, who is she listening to? This is the problem with Muslims in Europe. They listen to extreme voices. And he said, now tell her to shake my hand. She is like my daughter. And I didn't want to get into a confrontation. You know, he sits in the highest scholarly seat in Sunni.
But do you think that the Sheikh made a very interesting comment, actually? I mean, the Sheikh sitting in Al-Azhar in Egypt is pointing to the fact that the European converts and European Muslims are far more conservative. The people in Britain and in Europe are far more conservative Muslims than people that live in the Muslim countries.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I went to Pakistan to spend 2 or 3 weeks with some friends, because I said, you know, I feel as though I'm losing my spirituality and I really need to get back to
England.
No, to get back to roots. And they said, come out to Pakistan and we'll help you. And I had some time, and so I went out. And I decided that in Pakistan I'll start to wear the hijab, because it's a Muslim country and it will be easier for me to wear a hijab.
You started to wear hijab, or you stopped wearing hijab?
I started to wear.
You started to wear hijab. So it is in Pakistan that you started wearing hijab?
Yes. And
but most Pakistani women don't wear hijab.
Well, no, a sister came up to me and she said, why are you wearing
hijab?
The scarf? She said, the scarf. And I said, you know, it's an obligation in Islam. She said, look, you don't have to wear it, and this country is very hot. And I said, sister, it is a lot hotter in hell. And she looked, and by the afternoon
So was she referring that you wear hijab because of England as a cold country?
By the afternoon she was wearing her hijab, and I just thought, mashallah, you know, the hijab is an obligation. Some of us get to it much quicker than others. I don't think that women should be bullied and cajoled into wearing a hijab. This does not make me a better Muslim, but it is an obligation. And
but we have seen this very interesting thing that women who wear hijab, some of them wear very pretty and fashionable hijab, and some of them wear very simple hijab. So women are differentiating between the hijabs as well, right? I mean, they bring their innovation into hijab. So how do you look at that?
Well, as a white revert, I may as well put a flashing light on my head when I put on a hijab. So what I decided, when I'm in this country anyway, I'm going to make a virtue of the fact I'm wearing a hijab, and I wear bright scarves and experiment and sometimes put on a turban style, and because, you know, I'm going to attract attention anyway. But when I go into a Muslim country like Saudi or Bahrain or somewhere else, then I'm very happy just to put on a black hijab and just blend in.
How much time have you spent in Pakistan?
I try and get to Pakistan maybe 2 or 3 times a year. I love Pakistan. It's like a second home. And I was so distressed over the October 8th earthquake. It really... I went out there about 10 days later and lambasted the international community because I felt that they weren't giving or doing enough, and that there was a racism or Islamophobia behind it. Now then, I was out there as an ambassador for a charity and Helping Hands, and we organised a press conference. And when I stood up in this press conference and criticised the international community for not giving enough, I kept saying the word "we." And somebody said, "Why are you saying we?" And I said, I can't help it. It's just that sometimes Pakistan feels like my home. And I really do feel this pain.
But as a convert, as a Muslim European convert, what do you think of the Pakistan's Muslim society?
I love the Pakistan people because they've got this amazing positive attitude. If it's broken, we can fix it. If it's not there, we'll make sure it is. If it can't be done, we will make it happen. And they've just got this real can-do attitude. And I have never known a society like it that can whip up a great demonstration within half an hour and be very passionate about their faith. I feel as though the Pakistan people have been horribly let down by their politicians, and I am very disappointed about some aspects of Pakistan society, but I do have a big love for the Pakistan people.
At one stage you said you don't have any more man stress. What do you mean by that?
Well, before I became a Muslim, like most Western women, I would have casual relationships, boyfriends. You could never go to a party on your own. There was always a pressure to have a partner with you. And this, even in the teen magazines, children are taught that they've got to have a boyfriend. If they don't have a boyfriend, they'll be inadequate. And when I came to Islam, the alcohol went, the casual relationships went, and from the moment that that's all cleaned out of my life, I haven't sat waiting one night watching the phone begging it to ring. I haven't been stood up, I haven't had unnecessary rows, I haven't had to be at anyone's beck and call, and I've found real independence. And not only does Islam teach you to respect others, but it also has taught me to respect myself. And that in itself is liberating. Being judged on your mind and not the length of your skirt is fantastic. So all the hassles that go with men, I'm sorry, but all that, and sisters will know.
So are men responsible for that?
Of course you are. It's like the chicken and egg situation. There are some very simple laws in life, like gravity. When an apple comes from the tree, it will go straight down. If someone is to blame, it's a man. It's one and the other.
We're running short. We almost, I've taken so much of your time. Just one last question. I was reading through some of the websites, and it's on the BBC website, and I think some of the Christian or the Jewish commentators, his name is Alison Yaroshin, and he says Yvonne Ridley is very fortunate to have the freedom to convert to Islam. What about the thousands of Muslims who have no right to convert to Christianity? Many live under the fear of apostasy, being subjected to loss of home or job, even life in some instances. And the case of this recent person in Afghanistan, who's almost being punished, or I think is about to kill him for apostasy. on being suspicion of converting to Christianity. What would you respond to that?
You know, you have to dig behind the headlines for that man. That man converted to Christianity 14, 15 years ago. He abandoned his daughters, left them with their grandparents in Afghanistan. That isn't very Christian, but anyway, he did. He dumped his children, went off and worked for a charity in Pakistan, converted to Christianity. It's very, very interesting that that charity that helped convert him remained silent when he was arrested in Kabul. He went to Kabul, had a big row with his parents. His own parents called the police. He's carted away, and then he starts waving a Bible in Arabic, which is, by the way, a language he doesn't understand and he cannot speak. And of course, suddenly.
But what was he arrested for? Apostasy?
I think in the end that they were looking at you know, yes, this man's converted from Islam to Christianity, which.
But you exercise a similar right. So what would be your message?
In Sharia, that is my understanding is it's a crime during a time of war, a time of conflict. But there is no compulsion in religion. Now, this man had his own hidden agenda, and he's achieved it.
What would be your message to the Muslims on this issue? Like, you exercise that right.
I would just say to the Muslims, you know, ignore him. Don't even get embroiled in arguments with silly people who will try and cause divisions. What that commentator ought to do is ask why a Christian who can't speak Arabic is carrying an Arabic Bible. You know, the man is a fraud. He wanted political asylum. I hope he gets it. I hope he gets it and goes to live in George Bush's ranch in Crawford, Texas. I think they deserve each other.
Yvonne, I've taken enough time. Thank you so much. I can't shake your hands, but thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.